In a small town called Riverford, life seemed calm on the surface. With a population of about 3,000 people, the residents lived simple lives, knowing each other well, and rarely did anything big happen. However, beneath the quiet, this town held many dark secrets. The St. Paul's Church in the town center was the main meeting place, where every Sunday the locals gathered for worship. Though the town appeared peaceful, whispers behind closed doors were a constant part of life in Riverford. Everything changed in August 2007 when a shocking event rocked the town. Evelyn Frost, a 55-year-old wealthy widow known for her reserved and private nature, became the center of attention. Evelyn had a long history as a former business executive, amassing great wealth through several commercial properties in and around Riverford. With her smooth dark skin, neatly styled graying hair, and a cold manner of speaking, she exuded authority. As one of the wealthiest people in the town, Evelyn lived alone in a large mansion at the edge of town after her husband had passed away several years prior. The town was taken aback when Evelyn suddenly married Lucas Williams, a handsome 22-year-old man from a modest background. Lucas was a young man with dark skin, an athletic build, and a charming smile that won over everyone he met. Despite his friendly nature, Lucas had a history of financial troubles. He worked multiple odd jobs, from construction to waiting tables at a local diner, but his dreams of starting his own business were constantly held back by mounting debts. The town gossiped endlessly about the unlikely marriage. The striking age difference and their contrasting social statuses made the relationship seem unnatural. Evelyn, known for her lavish lifestyle and reclusive habits, marrying a man with almost nothing. Many whispered that Lucas had married Evelyn for her money, while others speculated that Evelyn was trying to fill the loneliness of her life. But all the rumors turned to horror when, just 2 days after the wedding, Lucas was found dead in their bedroom, showing clear signs of violence. Sheriff Mark Davis, a 45-year-old man with over 2 decades of experience as Riverford's lawman, immediately took charge of the case. Mark, with his burly build and graying hair at the temples, was known as a firm but fair sheriff. He had known Evelyn and Lucas for a long time, like he knew most of the people in Riverford. Yet something about this case didn't sit right with him. Evelyn's reaction to her new husband's death was oddly detached. She showed no emotion, no tears, no signs of grief. Her icy demeanor only fueled Mark's suspicion. The investigation began, but clues were scarce. Meanwhile, the town's gossip mill churned faster, with theories about Lucas's death growing wilder by the day. Some claimed he had been killed for his money, while others believed he had been involved in something shady. Amid all the speculation, attention turned to Lillian Gray, Lucas's childhood friend. Lillian Gray, a 28-year-old investigative journalist, was a fearless woman with long, curly black hair and piercing eyes filled with determination. As Lucas's longtime friend, Lillian felt that there was more to Lucas's marriage than met the eye. She knew Lucas wouldn't have married Evelyn just for her wealth. There was a deeper, hidden truth that no one had uncovered. Her childhood memories of Lucas convinced her that he was hiding something, a secret he hadn't shared with anyone. Driven by her instincts, Lillian began her own investigation into Lucas's life and his sudden marriage to Evelyn. She watched Evelyn closely, listening to whispers about how the wealthy widow had financially manipulated Lucas long before their marriage. As Lillian dug deeper, she discovered that Lucas, drowning in debt and on the brink of financial ruin, had likely felt forced into marrying Evelyn to save himself. Evelyn, with her vast fortune, seemed to have taken advantage of Lucas's vulnerability, setting up contracts that made him more and more dependent on her. Lillian's investigation led her to a mysterious figure, Daniel O'Connell. Daniel, a 35-year-old man with an intimidating presence, was rumored to be involved in the darker side of Riverford's business dealings. With dark skin and a tall, muscular build, Daniel had an air of menace about him, always seen in dark suits that made him stand out in the small town. As Lillian uncovered more about Lucas's life, Daniel's name kept coming up. He appeared to be connected to a shadowy network of extortion and illegal business activities, with Lucas caught in the middle. As Lillian delved further, she found herself facing growing threats. Warnings began arriving at her door, telling her to stop looking for answers. One night, Daniel himself confronted her at a small roadside cafe, issuing a chilling warning. "Stop looking for answers, or you'll end up just like Lucas," he said in a low, threatening voice. Though fear crept in, Lillian refused to back down. She felt the truth was just within reach. At the same time, Sheriff Davis's investigation uncovered some disturbing evidence. Lillian's fingerprints were found on the rope used to strangle Lucas. Lillian was arrested and interrogated, but she maintained her innocence. Under pressure, she finally confessed that on the night of Lucas's murder, she had indeed gone to Lucas and Evelyn's house. She believed Lucas was in danger after learning that Evelyn had bought poison from the local pharmacy. When she arrived in their bedroom, Lucas was already dying, poisoned by Evelyn. In her panic, Lillian had tried to save him, but her efforts only made things worse. In her confusion, she had accidentally strangled Lucas to death, trying to end his suffering. Despite Lillian's confession, Sheriff Davis still felt that this wasn't the full story. There was something more at play, especially regarding Evelyn's role. Evelyn, who had seemed so unaffected by her husband's death, began showing signs of unraveling. Rumors spread through the town that Lucas's ghost was haunting her grand mansion. Some nights, Evelyn claimed to hear footsteps or soft whispers, causing her to lose control of her emotions. Lillian, freed from the murder charges after her confession was deemed an act of panic, felt the story was far from over. She continued to dig into Daniel O'Connell's dealings, trying to uncover the connections between Lucas, Evelyn, and Daniel. Her investigation led her into the heart of a secretive network that involved extortion, illegal businesses, and dirty financial ties throughout Riverford. But Daniel wasn't willing to let Lillian expose the truth and began hunting her, warning that there would be dire consequences if she didn't stop. Riverford, which seemed so calm and peaceful, was now revealed to hold far darker secrets than anyone could have imagined. Faced with threats and surrounded by mysteries, Lillian was determined to uncover the full truth, even if it put her life in danger. That night in Riverford, the air felt heavy with an unusual humidity. The heavy rain that had drenched the small town all day had turned into a fine, oppressive drizzle. In Evelyn Frost's large house, dark shadows enveloped every corner of the room. The dim light of the candles flickered, swaying with the slight breeze that slipped through the slightly ajar old windows. Evelyn sat at the edge of her bed, her once upright body now looking frail. Her usually cold face was beginning to show real fear. Her lips trembled while her eyes gazed into the darkness, as if penetrating the shadows of the past. For 3 consecutive nights, Evelyn had been unable to sleep. Strange sounds had been increasingly heard in her house, soft yet deliberate footsteps, doors creaking open in the middle of the night, and faint whispers that seemed to come from the corners of the room. Each time she woke up, her heart raced, and her hands trembled as they clutched the blanket. It felt as if Lucas were still there, demanding something from her. The horror she felt deepened when she realized that it wasn't just guilt haunting her life, but something more tangible, Lucas's spirit, or at least that was what she believed. She felt Lucas coming to demand retribution. The longer it lasted, the more convinced Evelyn became that Lucas's death was not the end, but the beginning of something darker, something evil that she had never expected to confront. Meanwhile, in her small and simple apartment, Lillian Gray couldn't close her eyes. Beneath the weariness that plagued her after days of investigating Lucas and Evelyn's lives, curiosity continued to burn within her. Photos, notes, and documents were scattered across her desk, all leading to one name that now haunted her: Daniel O'Connell. Lillian knew that behind every rumor and threat lurking around her, there was a truth larger than the case of Lucas's murder. There was a criminal network operating beneath the surface of this small town, controlling people from the shadows, and Lucas, her childhood friend, had become trapped within it. Daniel O'Connell was not just a mysterious figure behind the town's dark businesses. He was someone with more power than the residents of Riverford could ever imagine. At just 35 years old, Daniel had built a kingdom of dirty businesses that reached far beyond the town's borders. With his tall, sturdy frame and sharp eyes, he seemed like someone always ready to take charge of any situation. However, for Lillian, Daniel's threat felt increasingly imminent. Each time she tried to dig deeper, there were new warnings threatening her life. As Lillian began to realize that everything that had happened to Lucas, from his debts to his death, might be more than just a failed marriage or poor financial decisions, the threats became more palpable. In the documents she uncovered, there were traces of Evelyn's involvement in the agreements Lucas had made that she had never known. Evelyn, who had long been viewed as a lonely, wealthy widow, actually played a much larger role in the destruction of Lucas's life. One night, Lillian decided to seek out someone who had long been avoiding her: Sarah Porter, an old servant in Evelyn's house. Sarah was a woman in her 40s, with dark skin, a hard face, and short curly hair often tied neatly back. She had worked for Evelyn for more than 10 years and knew everything that happened in that big house. However, since Lucas's death, Sarah had vanished from public sight. She had quit her job with Evelyn, refusing to speak to anyone, even shutting herself off from the gossip circulating in town. Lillian met Sarah in a small cafe on the edge of town. The place was quiet, with only a few customers sitting far apart from each other. Sarah appeared restless, her eyes constantly scanning the room as if someone was watching her. After a moment of silence, Sarah finally began to speak. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as if afraid that the secret she carried would invite greater danger. Evelyn isn't who you think she is, Sarah said seriously. She has always had secrets from the very beginning. Lucas was just one of her victims. Lillian gasped. What do you mean? Sarah looked at her with a piercing gaze, her eyes filled with fear. Lucas didn't die by accident. Evelyn planned everything. She needed someone to fall into her web, and Lucas, he was just a pawn. I've seen things that I can't explain in that house. Things that involve more than just money. More than money, Lillian asked, intrigued. What do you mean? What really happened? Sarah took a deep breath, as if preparing to reveal something profoundly dark. There were nights when I heard noises. Voices that didn't come from this world. Footsteps, whispers. And something happened in Evelyn's room, something involving Lucas before his death. I don't know if it was real or just my imagination. But since then, I haven't been able to sleep soundly. It's as if something has been chasing us all. Lillian fell silent for a moment, trying to process what she had just heard. Evelyn, the cold woman who seemed untouched by the tragedy around her, was hiding a far darker secret than she had ever imagined. And Lucas, her friend, had become a victim of a greater dark game. Now, with Daniel O'Connell's threats and Lucas's ghost haunting Evelyn, Lillian knew that her investigation had plunged her deeper than she had anticipated. Meanwhile, in the dark, gloomy house, Evelyn sat in her chair, feeling the cold air wrap around her. The sound of footsteps echoed again from upstairs, this time clearer. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Was it Lucas? Was he coming to demand retribution? The bedroom door suddenly creaked open, and in the thick darkness, Evelyn felt the presence of someone lurking in the shadows. Lucas, she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. But the answer wasn't her husband's voice. A faint whisper, almost like the sound of the wind, clearly spoke in her ear, "You won't get away with this." Evelyn screamed, her body trembling violently. Now she knew whatever she had done, Lucas's spirit would not let her escape without paying a steep price. Lillian continued her relentless pursuit for the truth, feeling a deeper connection to the mysteries that surrounded Lucas's death. After her conversation with Sarah, she was even more determined to unravel the tangled web of lies surrounding Evelyn. The details Sarah had provided painted a vivid picture of a woman who was not only wealthy but also deeply manipulative, willing to go to any lengths to protect her secrets. As days turned into nights, Lillian devoted herself to digging deeper into the records she had gathered. Each document seemed to echo with whispers of betrayal and treachery, revealing the extent of Evelyn's machinations. She stumbled upon bank statements indicating suspicious transactions, money being funneled into obscure accounts that bore Daniel's name. With every clue, Lillian felt the shadows closing in around her. One evening, while poring over these documents, Lillian made a startling discovery. There was a name mentioned in the transactions, a man named Marcus Hale, a known associate of Daniel's who had a reputation for being ruthless in the underworld. As Lillian's heart raced, she understood that Marcus could be the key to uncovering the truth. However, confronting him would come with its own risks. Driven by an urgent need for answers, Lillian decided to seek out Marcus Hale. Her instincts screamed at her that he was involved in the dealings that led to Lucas's downfall. She traced his last known whereabouts to a rundown bar on the outskirts of Riverford, a place where the light barely penetrated the murky atmosphere, and whispers of danger hung thick in the air. As Lillian stepped into the bar, the low hum of conversation ceased momentarily, and heads turned to assess the newcomer. The air was stale with the scent of smoke and cheap liquor, and the dim lighting cast shadows on the faces of the patrons. Lillian's heart raced, but she steeled herself and walked toward the back, where a man sat alone at a corner table, nursing a drink. "Marcus Hale?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the tension gripping her. Marcus looked up, his eyes narrowing as he sized her up. "Who's asking?" His tone was laced with suspicion, the atmosphere crackling with unspoken danger. "I need to talk to you about Lucas Williams and Evelyn Frost," Lillian replied, not backing down. A cold smile crept across Marcus's face. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But be careful, sweetheart. The waters you're swimming in are murky." "I'm not afraid," Lillian insisted, though her heart raced at the threat implied in his words. "Then you're either very brave or very foolish," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Evelyn is not someone you want to mess with. She has connections that run deep. And as for Lucas, he was a pawn in a game far bigger than you or me." "What do you know?" Lillian pressed, determined not to let Marcus intimidate her. "I want the truth." Marcus studied her for a moment before leaning closer, lowering his voice. Evelyn was never the innocent widow. She played a role in Lucas's downfall. She knew about his debts and his desperation. She used it to her advantage. He thought marrying her would save him, but it only tightened the noose around his neck. Lillian felt a chill run down her spine. What did she want from him? Power. Control. Lucas was a way for her to extend her influence in the town. But when he became a liability, she had to make a choice. And we both know how that ended. With every word Marcus spoke, the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on her, but Lillian was determined to expose Evelyn for what she really was. As she left the bar, she felt the shadows closing in around her, but she couldn't turn back now. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in her darkened room, her thoughts racing. The past few nights had been tormenting, filled with visions of Lucas's face twisted in pain and betrayal. The chilling whispers continued, echoing in her mind. Evelyn, they would hiss, you thought you could escape the consequences. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Evelyn felt the room grow colder. Suddenly the lights flickered, plunging her into darkness. Panic surged within her. She reached for her phone, her hands shaking, but before she could turn it on, a figure appeared before her. Lucas, she gasped, her heart racing. But the figure was not Lucas. It was a silhouette, dark and foreboding, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the shadows. Time's up, Evelyn, the figure said, a voice dripping with malice. You can't hide from the truth forever. Evelyn stumbled back, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what she was witnessing. Who are you? She demanded, though the answer hung heavily in the air. The figure stepped closer, revealing the glint of a knife in their hand. I'm the consequence of your actions. You thought you could play the game and come out unscathed. Now, it's time to pay the price. With that, Evelyn felt the weight of her choices crashing down upon her. The walls of her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison closing in around her. As she stood frozen in fear, she realized that the ghosts of her past were not only haunting her but were coming to collect their dues. In that moment, she knew the true horror of what she had done. Lucas's spirit was not the only one seeking retribution. She had awoken a darkness within herself that could no longer be contained. The game she had played was now coming to an end, and the consequences were more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. As they dashed through the forest, Evelyn and Lillian could hear the sound of footsteps trailing behind them, growing louder and closer. The darkness pressed around them like a living entity, threatening to swallow them whole. We can't keep running forever, Evelyn shouted, panic evident in her voice, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Lillian glanced back, her heart racing as she caught a glimpse of Daniel's shadowy figure moving swiftly through the trees. We have to find somewhere to hide, she said, urgency in her tone. We can't let him catch us. Finally, they spotted a dilapidated cabin nestled deep among the trees, its outline barely visible in the dark. There Lillian pointed, her voice filled with desperation. They raced toward it, pushing open the creaky door, which protested with a haunting groan. Inside, the air was thick with dust and stale memories. Broken furniture lay scattered about, and the faint smell of decay permeated the space. They quickly scanned the room, searching for a place to hide. Lillian crouched behind an old wooden table while Evelyn cautiously approached the grimy windows, peering out into the darkness. Do you think he saw us? Lillian whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Evelyn shook her head, trying to stay calm. I don't know. But we can't stay here long. As they waited in tense silence, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on leaves outside. Evelyn's heart raced, and she clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. He's close, she murmured. Just then, a shadow moved past the window, and Evelyn caught a glimpse of Daniel, his tall figure illuminated momentarily by the moonlight. He paused, scanning the area, and Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. We need to move, she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. Without another word, they slipped out the back door and into the woods again, adrenaline pushing them forward. But the trees loomed like silent witnesses to their panic, and every rustle seemed to echo with Daniel's presence. The night air felt suffocating, and the weight of their fear hung heavily around them. They ran through the underbrush, branches snagging at their clothes. We have to find a way to stop him, Lillian panted, her breath coming in sharp bursts. We can't let him keep hunting us like this. Evelyn nodded, her mind racing. If we can find a way to turn the tables, maybe we can get the upper hand. We need to gather evidence, something that proves his connection to Lucas and this whole nightmare. Lillian's eyes sparkled with determination. Right. There has to be something in that cabin, some document or clue that can help us. Let's go back. Evelyn hesitated, glancing back in the direction they had come. Are you sure? What if he's still around? It's a risk we have to take, Lillian replied, her voice steady. We can't just keep running blindly. We need a plan. They cautiously made their way back to the cabin, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. As they approached, the cabin looked even more menacing under the moonlight, its broken windows resembling empty eyes watching their every move. They slipped inside, and the door creaked ominously as they closed it behind them. Inside, the cabin felt different, charged with a sense of dread. Lillian moved quickly, rifling through drawers and cabinets, while Evelyn kept watch at the window. The air was thick with tension, each creak of the floorboards making them jump. Found anything? Evelyn asked, her heart racing as she glanced over her shoulder. Lillian shook her head, frustration creeping into her voice. Just old papers and junk. We need something concrete, something that ties him to Lucas. Just as Evelyn turned to help Lillian, a loud crash echoed from outside, making them both jump. They exchanged terrified glances. He's here, Evelyn whispered, her heart pounding. Lillian grabbed the axe they had found earlier, its weight comforting in her hands. We need to find a place to hide again quickly. They ducked behind the old table just as the door swung open with a bang, revealing Daniel, his silhouette framed by the darkness outside. I know you're in here, he called, his voice dripping with malice. You can't hide from me forever. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, and she clutched Lillian's arm, fear coursing through her veins. They could hear Daniel's footsteps as he moved around the cabin, looking for them. We can't let him find us, Lillian whispered fiercely. They waited in silence, the tension thick in the air. Daniel's footsteps echoed, and they could hear him rummaging through the other room, searching for any sign of them. Evelyn's heart raced, and she felt a sense of impending doom settling over them. Suddenly, Daniel's voice rang out, filled with amusement. You think hiding will save you? I'll find you eventually, and when I do, he let the threat linger in the air, and the weight of his words hung heavily in the room. Evelyn exchanged a glance with Lillian, both of them aware that their time was running out. They needed to act quickly. Lillian, we have to create a distraction, Evelyn said, her mind racing. Something to lure him away from here. Lillian nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. I can throw something out the window to make noise. Good idea. Just be careful, Evelyn replied, her heart pounding as she watched Lillian slip away to the window. As Lillian prepared to throw an old tin can out the window, she felt the weight of Daniel's gaze on her. You think I'm going to fall for that, he called out, a sinister chuckle escaping his lips. You're wasting your time. With a swift motion, Lillian hurled the can out of the window, and it clattered loudly on the ground outside. Daniel paused, intrigued, and moved toward the noise, leaving the door open behind him. Now's our chance, Evelyn hissed, slipping out from behind the table. They rushed toward the door, but just as they reached it, they heard Daniel's voice calling back. You think you can escape me? You're in my world now. His laughter sent chills down their spines, and they bolted out into the night. The forest closed in around them again, shadows dancing in the moonlight. We have to find a way to turn the tide against him, Lillian said, her voice breathless. If we can figure out his connection to Lucas, maybe we can expose him. They navigated through the trees, their minds racing with possibilities. We need to find someone who knows Daniel, someone who can help us, Evelyn suggested, her thoughts racing back to the townspeople. Maybe Sheriff Davis can provide some insight. Lillian nodded, but doubt flickered in her eyes. But can we trust anyone? What if Daniel has his eyes everywhere? What if we're walking into a trap? Evelyn sighed, frustration welling up inside her. We don't have many options left. We need allies, and we can't let fear paralyze us. They continued deeper into the woods, weaving through the dense underbrush. The sound of Daniel's laughter echoed behind them, taunting and chilling. You can run, but you can't hide, he shouted, his voice a haunting reminder of the danger closing in on them. As they reached the edge of the forest, the dim lights of Riverford twinkled in the distance. We need to get to the sheriff's office, Lillian urged, pointing toward the town. It's our best chance. They sprinted toward the lights, the safety of the town drawing them closer. But as they entered Riverford, a sense of unease washed over them. The streets were eerily quiet, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Evelyn and Lillian approached the sheriff's office, their hearts pounding. What if he's already warned Sheriff Davis? Lillian asked, worry creasing her brow. We'll take that risk, Evelyn replied firmly, pushing open the door. The small office was dimly lit, papers strewn about, and the radio crackled softly in the background. Sheriff Davis sat at his desk, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he saw them. Evelyn. Lillian. What are you doing here? He exclaimed, rising to his feet. We need your help. Sheriff Lillian rushed out, her voice urgent. Daniel is after us. He's connected to everything that happened to Lucas, and we need to expose him before it's too late. Sheriff Davis's face darkened, his instincts kicking in. Tell me everything, he said, his tone serious. They quickly explained the events of the past few days, sharing every detail they had uncovered about Daniel and his connection to Lucas. The sheriff listened intently, nodding as they spoke. Daniel O'Connell, Sheriff Davis mused, his expression grim. He's been trouble for years. I've suspected he's involved in illegal activities, but I never had enough proof to act. If what you're saying is true, then we need to take immediate action. Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. Can you help us? We need to gather evidence and confront him. Sheriff Davis nodded. We can set up a sting operation. If he's as dangerous as you say, we need to be prepared. They spent the next few hours strategizing, their minds racing with possibilities. The sheriff called in his deputies, and together they devised a plan to trap Daniel, hoping to catch him off guard. As they prepared, Evelyn felt a sense of foreboding settle in her stomach. What if he's one step ahead of us, she asked, glancing at Lillian, who seemed equally anxious. Then we fight back, Lillian replied fiercely, determination shining in her eyes. We won't let him win. With a plan in place, they set out toward the cabin, ready to confront Daniel once and for all. The air was thick with tension as they approached the clearing where the cabin stood, its broken windows appearing like eyes watching them. As they neared the cabin, they saw Daniel's silhouette through the grimy window. He's inside, Sheriff Davis whispered, signaling for the deputies to take their positions. Evelyn and Lillian felt a mix of fear and determination as they readied themselves for the confrontation. Stay close, Sheriff Davis instructed, his voice low. We'll go in together. With a nod, they moved forward, pushing open the cabin door with a sense of dread. The room was dark and silent, the atmosphere thick with tension. Daniel, Sheriff Davis called, his voice echoing in the stillness. We know what you've been doing. Daniel stepped out from the shadows, a wicked smile on his face. Ah, the sheriff and his little friends, he sneered. You think you can stop me? Evelyn's heart raced as she felt the weight of his gaze on her. This ends tonight, Daniel, she shouted, her voice filled with defiance. You're foolish to think you can challenge me, he replied, his voice dripping with contempt. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Suddenly, the tension in the room snapped like a taut string. Sheriff Davis lunged forward, but Daniel was quicker, dodging to the side and knocking a chair into the sheriff's path. You think you can take me down? I'm untouchable. Daniel laughed, his voice echoing eerily in the cabin. Evelyn and Lillian moved to flank him, determined not to let him escape. We're not afraid of you, Lillian shouted, brandishing the axe. Daniel's smile widened, his eyes glinting with madness. You should be, he said, his voice low and menacing. You have no idea what's coming. The room felt charged with energy as they prepared for a fight. Evelyn's heart raced, and she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. They had to end this now. Get him, Sheriff Davis shouted, moving to tackle Daniel. But he was too fast, slipping away from the sheriff's grasp and darting toward the back door. In a split second, Evelyn knew they had to act quickly. Lillian. Block the door, she yelled, adrenaline pushing her forward. Lillian rushed to the door, using the axe to block it just as Daniel tried to escape. He slammed against the door, his eyes filled with rage. You think you can trap me, he screamed, but Lillian held firm. Don't let him through, Evelyn shouted, her voice fierce. Daniel turned, his gaze landing on Evelyn with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. You're just delaying the inevitable, he sneered. You can't stop me. But Evelyn refused to back down. We're going to expose you for what you are, she shouted, her voice filled with conviction. Suddenly, Daniel lunged toward Lillian, trying to knock her aside. But she held her ground, using the axe to push him back. You won't get past me, she yelled, her eyes fierce with determination. The struggle intensified as Daniel fought to break free, his strength surprising. But with Sheriff Davis joining the fray, they managed to pin him against the wall. You're finished, Daniel, the sheriff declared, his voice steady. As they restrained him, Daniel's laughter echoed through the cabin, a chilling sound that sent shivers down their spines. You think you've won, he taunted. This is just the beginning. Evelyn felt a wave of dread wash over her. What do you mean, she asked, her voice shaking. Daniel's smile widened, a sinister glint in his eyes. You have no idea what I've set in motion. You're only pawns in a much larger game. Before they could react, Daniel began to laugh uncontrollably, a sound that sent chills down their spines. Suddenly, the cabin shook violently, and the walls creaked ominously. "What's happening?" Lillian shouted, fear in her voice. Evelyn's heart raced as she realized the cabin was beginning to collapse around them. "We have to get out of here," she yelled, pulling Lillian toward the door. But as they tried to escape, Daniel's laughter echoed in their ears. "You can't run from this. It's too late." They burst out of the cabin just as the structure began to crumble behind them, the sound of splintering wood and crashing debris filling the air. They stumbled into the forest, the weight of fear and uncertainty pressing down on them. "What just happened?" Lillian gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Evelyn looked back at the cabin, now a pile of rubble. "He's right. We don't know what he's planning," she said, her mind racing. "But we need to find a way to stop whatever he's unleashed." Sheriff Davis nodded, urgency etched on his face. "We have to warn the town. If he's involved in something bigger, we need to gather everyone and prepare." As they raced back toward Riverford, the night felt heavier, shadows stretching around them like creeping vines. Each rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sent adrenaline coursing through their veins. They reached the sheriff's office breathless and filled with dread. "We need to call for backup," Sheriff Davis said, picking up the phone. "If Daniel's behind something larger, we need the entire town on alert." Evelyn and Lillian stood by, anxiety rising as they waited for the sheriff to finish the call. "What do we do if he tries to come after us again?" Lillian asked, fear evident in her voice. "We'll be ready," Sheriff Davis replied, his expression resolute. "This isn't over yet. We'll figure this out together." But as they gathered their thoughts, a loud crash echoed from outside, shaking the office. They exchanged worried glances, feeling the weight of impending doom. "What now?" Evelyn asked, her heart racing. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. "Stay close," Sheriff Davis shouted, reaching for his flashlight. In the distance, they heard a menacing laughter, chilling and eerie. "You think you can escape me?" Daniel's voice echoed, and Evelyn felt a wave of terror wash over her. They huddled together, adrenaline surging through their veins. "We need to find a weapon," Lillian said, her voice steadying as she searched the room. Here, Sheriff Davis handed them a couple of flashlights. "Stay vigilant. He's not going to give up easily." With renewed determination, they stepped outside, the night air thick with tension. The streets of Riverford were eerily silent, the shadows dancing under the dim light of the street lamps. "Where is he?" Lillian whispered, scanning the area. Suddenly they heard footsteps approaching, and Daniel emerged from the darkness, a sinister smile on his face. "Did you really think you could escape me? I'll make sure you regret this." Evelyn felt a rush of fear, but she couldn't let it consume her. "We won't let you win," she shouted, her voice filled with defiance. Daniel laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down their spines. "You're outnumbered and outmatched. You're in my world now." With a sudden burst of energy, he lunged toward them, and Evelyn and Lillian instinctively stepped back, fear coursing through them. But Sheriff Davis stood his ground, ready to defend them. "Get back," he yelled, pushing the flashlight toward Daniel, the beam illuminating his face. Daniel flinched for a moment but quickly regained his composure, his eyes narrowing with fury. "You think light can stop me?" he hissed. Evelyn could feel the atmosphere shifting, darkness creeping closer as Daniel advanced. They had to act quickly. "Lillian, we need to find something, anything to use against him," she urged, her heart racing. As they searched the surroundings, Daniel continued to taunt them. "You're running out of time. This is only the beginning. You'll never escape." Just then, Lillian spotted an old metal pipe lying on the ground. "Here," she shouted, grabbing it and holding it up defiantly. "This can work as a weapon." Evelyn's heart raced. "Let's use it together." As they prepared for the confrontation, Daniel lunged forward, but this time they stood their ground. "We're not afraid of you," Lillian shouted, swinging the pipe toward him. Daniel dodged, but the determination in their eyes seemed to momentarily stall him. "You think you're strong?" he taunted. "You're only delaying the inevitable." With renewed courage, they pressed forward, ready to fight back. "We will fight for our lives," Evelyn yelled, swinging the pipe with all her might. The night echoed with their struggle as they battled against Daniel, the fight becoming a blur of fear and adrenaline. But as the confrontation intensified, it became clear that they couldn't keep running forever. Evelyn felt a surge of determination. "We have to find his weakness," she shouted to Lillian, dodging Daniel's grasp. Look for anything we can use against him, Lillian shouted back, her voice steady despite the chaos. In the thick of the struggle, they noticed a glint of metal on the ground, a shard of broken glass. Over there, Evelyn pointed, their eyes meeting with resolve. With a quick motion, Lillian grabbed the shard and held it tightly. "Let's end this," she yelled, feeling the weight of fear transform into power. As they turned back to face Daniel, he seemed to sense their resolve. "You think you can defeat me?" he sneered, the darkness swirling around him. But they stood together, the shard glinting in the faint light. "Together we can stop you," they shouted, their voices echoing in the night. The battle surged forward, a fight against the darkness threatening to engulf them. And as they fought back, they felt a flicker of hope igniting within them, a belief that together, they could overcome the nightmare that had haunted them for so long. The night grew darker, but their determination shone like a beacon, guiding them through the shadows. They were ready to face whatever came next, united against the darkness that threatened to consume them. As the days turned into weeks, Evelyn and Lillian felt a weight on their shoulders that grew heavier with each passing moment. The eerie calm of Riverford had been shattered, replaced by an atmosphere of dread and uncertainty. The haunting knowledge that they were being watched kept them on edge, their minds racing with the implications of their discoveries. One evening, as they sat in Evelyn's grand but now oppressive home, reviewing notes and piecing together the puzzle, Lillian spoke up. "We can't keep living like this. We need to do something before it's too late." Evelyn nodded, her face pale with anxiety. "You're right. We have to confront Daniel and expose what's really happening in this town. But we need a plan. If he finds out we're onto him, we could be in serious danger." Their decision solidified, they began to map out their next steps. "Let's start by gathering evidence of Daniel's connections to the darker dealings in Riverford," Lillian suggested. "If we can document everything, we can go to the authorities with proof." "Good idea," Evelyn agreed. "But we need to be cautious. We can't trust anyone. If Daniel has spies or informants, they'll alert him the moment we start digging." Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, they began researching local businesses that Daniel frequented. They discovered a bar on the outskirts of town known for its questionable clientele. It was the perfect place to gather information without drawing too much attention. Under the guise of curiosity, they planned to visit. As they drove through the dimly lit streets, tension filled the air. Lillian's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "I can't shake this feeling that we're being followed," she said, glancing nervously into the rearview mirror. "Just focus on the mission," Evelyn replied, trying to suppress her own rising anxiety. "We're going to get answers tonight." Upon arriving at the bar, they could feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on them. The dim light and muffled conversations created an almost suffocating ambience. They spotted a booth in the corner and slid into the shadows, hoping to overhear something useful. As they listened to the conversations around them, snippets of information began to surface, whispers of illegal dealings, debt collectors, and menacing figures who loomed large in the lives of the townspeople. It was a world they had only glimpsed at before, but now felt dangerously close to uncovering. Suddenly, a familiar face entered the bar, Daniel O'Connell. He strolled in confidently, his presence commanding attention as he made his way to the bar. Evelyn's heart raced. "That's him," she whispered, nudging Lillian. They watched as Daniel spoke to the bartender, his demeanor casual. But there was a tension in the air that set Lillian's instincts on high alert. "We have to get closer," she urged. Evelyn hesitated. "What if he sees us? We need to hear what he's saying. It might be our only chance," Lillian insisted. With caution, they moved to a nearby table, positioning themselves where they could eavesdrop. As they listened intently, Daniel began discussing business matters with a couple of rough-looking men. The conversation was laced with threats and undertones of violence, revealing a side of Riverford they had never imagined. "Get rid of the loose ends," one of the men said, a sinister smile creeping across his face. "Trust me, I know how to handle it," Daniel replied, his voice low and menacing. "I won't let anyone interfere with my plans." Evelyn and Lillian exchanged horrified glances. The implications of his words sent chills down their spines. They needed to leave now. Just as they began to retreat, Daniel turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the room. It was as if he sensed their presence. Panic surged through Lillian. "We have to go. He can't know we were here." They slipped out of the bar, hearts pounding, and rushed to the car. As they drove away, Lillian glanced back, her breath hitching in her throat. What if he saw us? What if he knows? "Let's focus on what we heard. We need to get this information to Mark," Evelyn urged, trying to keep her mind on the task at hand. Once they reached home, they hurriedly wrote down everything they had overheard, their hands trembling with adrenaline. "This is it," Lillian said, her voice shaking. "This is what we need to bring Daniel down." Evelyn nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "We'll show him we're not afraid." The next morning, they arranged to meet with Sheriff Mark Davis at a secluded spot in the woods, away from prying eyes. They couldn't risk Daniel discovering their intentions. As they arrived, they spotted Mark waiting for them, looking concerned. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "Not really. We have something important to share," Evelyn said, glancing around to ensure they were alone. They recounted their experience at the bar and what they had overheard about Daniel's plans. Mark listened intently, nodding. "This is serious. If what you heard is true, we need to act quickly. But I need more than just hearsay. I'll need evidence to take to the authorities." Evelyn felt a mix of frustration and urgency. "What kind of evidence?" "Anything tangible. Photos, recordings, anything that links Daniel to these threats." "We need to build a solid case," Mark replied. Determined to gather evidence, Evelyn and Lillian decided to return to the bar that evening, hoping to capture something on their phones. As night fell, they prepared themselves mentally, knowing the risks involved. Inside the bar, they settled at the same table, trying to blend in. They ordered drinks and waited, keeping their eyes peeled for Daniel and his associates. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every sound amplified in their ears. Hours passed, and just as they were about to give up hope, Daniel walked in again, flanked by the same men. This time they were even more on edge, knowing that they had to get proof of his illicit dealings. With their phones discreetly ready, they recorded snippets of conversations as Daniel spoke to the men about their business operations. Lillian's heart raced as she captured a moment where Daniel explicitly discussed plans that involved intimidation and violence against those who owed him money. Suddenly their luck turned. One of the men spotted them, narrowing his eyes. "Hey, what are you two doing over there?" he barked. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "We need to go," she hissed, but before they could make their escape, Daniel turned to face them, a chilling grin spreading across his face. "Looks like we have some unwanted guests," he said smoothly, his tone dangerously calm. They bolted for the door, but the men were already on their heels. As they burst outside, they scrambled to the car, panic driving them forward. Just as they reached the vehicle, one of Daniel's associates grabbed Lillian's arm, yanking her back. "Not so fast," he growled. But Evelyn was quick. She swung her purse, catching him in the face, and they both jumped into the car. Lillian fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking, while Evelyn glanced back at the approaching figures. Finally, Lillian started the engine, and they sped away, adrenaline coursing through their veins. "That was too close," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Evelyn took a deep breath, heart racing. "We got the evidence, but we need to be smart about this. We have to analyze what we recorded and find a way to present it to Mark without Daniel knowing." Once home, they reviewed the footage, their hearts still racing. Each clip painted a clearer picture of Daniel's nefarious activities. It was their key to exposing the truth. They knew they had to share this with Sheriff Mark immediately. The next day, they met with Mark again, this time armed with undeniable evidence. "This is huge," he said, watching the recordings intently. "We can't waste any time. I'll take this to the authorities, but you both need to stay under the radar. Daniel will not take this lightly." Just as they were about to leave, a sense of foreboding washed over Evelyn. "What if he comes after us? What if he knows we're involved?" Mark's expression turned serious. "If he does, I'll make sure you're protected. We can arrange for you to stay somewhere safe until we handle this." They nodded, feeling the weight of his words. But even with Mark's assurance, doubt crept into their minds. The danger felt all too real, and the shadows of their past experiences loomed large. As they returned home, they remained vigilant, hyper-aware of every sound and movement outside. That night, they decided to stay up, taking turns monitoring the surroundings. Hours passed, and the quiet seemed to stretch on, but as dawn approached, they both began to feel fatigue. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, jolting them awake. "What was that?" Lillian gasped, her eyes wide with terror. Evelyn peered out the window and gasped. "It's Daniel. He's here." Panic surged through them as they realized they were in immediate danger. "We have to get out of here," Lillian shouted, scrambling to grab her bag. Just as they turned to leave, the front door burst open. Daniel stood there, his expression a mix of anger and amusement. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" he sneered, stepping into the room with an air of menace. "Run!" Evelyn screamed. and they both dashed for the back door, but Daniel was faster. He lunged toward them, grabbing Lillian by the wrist and yanking her back. "Let her go," Evelyn shouted, adrenaline pumping through her veins as she rushed at him. In a flash, she managed to break Daniel's grip on Lillian, and they both stumbled outside, desperate to escape. But Daniel was relentless, pursuing them through the shadows of their yard. "Don't think you can escape this easily," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the night. They dashed into the woods behind their home, the trees casting ominous shadows around them. The thorns and branches clawed at their clothes, but they pressed on, adrenaline fueling their flight. As they ran deeper into the forest, they could hear Daniel's footsteps closing in, his angry shouts echoing through the trees. "You can't hide from me." Gasping for breath, Lillian glanced back, fear gripping her heart. "What do we do now? We can't let him catch us." Evelyn thought quickly, "We need to find somewhere to hide. If we can just lose him, we can call for help." They spotted a hollow tree ahead, and without a second thought, they darted towards it, squeezing into the narrow space just as Daniel burst through the clearing. They held their breath, praying he wouldn't see them. Daniel stopped, listening intently. "I know you're out there," he shouted, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "You can't hide forever." The girls remained silent, their hearts pounding in their chests. The minutes felt like hours as they listened to Daniel pacing nearby, his frustration palpable. Finally, he stormed away, muttering curses under his breath. They waited for what felt like an eternity before daring to peek out. Evelyn turned to Lillian, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to find our way back to the house and get to the police. It's the only way to end this." With a nod, they cautiously crawled out of their hiding spot, keeping an eye out for any sign of Daniel. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a weak light through the trees, illuminating their path back home. As they made their way cautiously through the underbrush, they heard a rustle behind them. Lillian froze, her breath hitching in her throat. "What was that?" she whispered, her eyes darting around. Before they could react, Daniel emerged from the shadows, a twisted smile on his face. "Did you really think you could escape me?" he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. "Run!" Evelyn screamed, and they bolted again, panic surging through them. But this time Daniel was ready. He charged after them, closing the gap with alarming speed. The girls pushed themselves to run faster, their lungs burning as they fought against exhaustion. Just as they thought they were gaining distance, Daniel's hand shot out, catching Lillian's arm. She screamed as he yanked her back, pulling her close. "You're not getting away that easily," he hissed, eyes dark with fury. Evelyn spun around, her heart racing. "Let her go," she shouted, desperation fueling her voice. In a split-second decision, Evelyn lunged at Daniel, aiming for his torso. The two collided, sending them both tumbling to the ground. Lillian, momentarily freed from Daniel's grip, scrambled away, but Evelyn knew she had to act quickly. With all her strength, she pushed Daniel away and sprang to her feet. "Run, Lillian. Get to the road," she yelled, glancing back at her friend. Lillian hesitated for a moment, her instincts battling between helping Evelyn and saving herself. But Evelyn's fierce determination fueled her resolve. "Go," she shouted again, and Lillian took off, sprinting toward the faint glow of the road. Daniel, infuriated, scrambled to his feet, eyes burning with rage. "You'll pay for this," he growled, lunging after Lillian, but Evelyn stood her ground. "Leave her alone," she screamed, throwing a rock at him. It hit him in the shoulder, causing him to stumble. Evelyn took advantage of the moment and sprinted after Lillian, desperately trying to close the distance. Just as Lillian reached the edge of the road, she saw headlights approaching. "Help!" She waved her arms frantically, heart racing as she heard Daniel's footsteps closing in behind her. The driver, startled, swerved and slammed on the brakes, staring wide-eyed at the scene unfolding before him. "Get in. Get in," he shouted, and Lillian wasted no time. Evelyn was right behind her, and they both jumped into the vehicle as the driver hit the gas. Daniel barely reached them in time, slamming his fist against the back of the car. "Go, go, go," Evelyn urged, her voice trembling with adrenaline. The driver sped away, leaving Daniel standing in the middle of the road, his face contorted with rage. Evelyn and Lillian watched through the back window as he faded into the distance, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and relief. "Are you two okay?" the driver asked, glancing at them with concern. Lillian took a shaky breath. "No, not really. We need to get to the police. There's a man, he's dangerous. The driver nodded, shifting into high gear. Hang on. I'll get you there. As they raced toward the police station, Evelyn felt a mix of gratitude and dread. They had escaped Daniel for now, but she knew this was far from over. The evidence they had gathered would mean nothing if they couldn't keep themselves safe. When they arrived at the police station, they rushed inside, their voices overlapping as they explained the situation to the officers on duty. We have proof of Daniel's crimes, Evelyn insisted, her urgency palpable. Mark appeared, his expression grim. What happened? Daniel tried to kill us. We have recordings and evidence of everything he's been doing, Lillian exclaimed, her eyes wide with panic. As they handed over their phones, the tension in the air thickened. Mark quickly reviewed the footage, his brow furrowing. This is serious. We need to act immediately. They could see the gears turning in Mark's mind as he strategized. We'll assemble a team and take action tonight. We can't let him continue this rampage. Be careful, though. He knows we're onto him, Evelyn warned, the fear creeping back into her mind. We'll be prepared. Stay here, I'll keep you safe, Mark assured them. As night fell, the officers mobilized, preparing to confront Daniel and his associates. Evelyn and Lillian sat anxiously in the station, hearts racing as they waited for news. Hours felt like an eternity, but finally Mark returned, looking relieved. We found him, he announced. We've arrested Daniel and several of his associates. Thanks to your evidence, we have a solid case against them. Tears of relief filled Lillian's eyes as she hugged Evelyn tightly. We did it, she whispered, disbelief flooding her voice. Evelyn smiled through her tears, feeling the weight lift off their shoulders. We did it together. But even as they celebrated their victory, a small voice in the back of Evelyn's mind reminded her that the shadows of their ordeal would linger. They had faced darkness and danger, but the fight was far from over. As the days turned into weeks, the community slowly began to heal, and the whispers of fear faded. But for Evelyn and Lillian, the memories of that night remained etched in their minds, a constant reminder of their resilience and courage. Together, they had faced the abyss and emerged stronger, determined to ensure that Riverford would never again fall victim to the darkness that had threatened to consume it. Yet, deep down, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't truly over. The world they had uncovered was more intricate than they had imagined, and while Daniel was behind bars, his influence lingered. As they walked through the town side by side, they knew they would always be vigilant. Together, they would protect their community and each other, ready to face whatever darkness might come their way next. And as they stepped forward into the light, they knew that their bond had been forged in the fires of adversity, unbreakable and unwavering, prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead.